I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for December the 12th, 2025. Today on our Theology Roundup, we are continuing a multi-part series, What is the New Covenant? And specifically today, we will deal with the common issue of whether or not the prophesied Brit Chadashah, that's Jeremiah 31 to 34 principally, is a new covenant or a renewed covenant. And if you have been in the Messianic sphere of influence for any amount of time, you have doubtlessly heard people refer to the Brit Chadashah, what's prophesied in Jeremiah 31, as a renewed covenant. And all of us at one time or another have probably taken to use that term, but we perhaps haven't thought through it critically enough. So we're going to deal with that today. If you'll turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net, click on the Articles tab, and then go down to the letter N. You see what is the new covenant. Click there, and then a PDF file will open up, and we will be picking up where we left off yesterday. A quote-unquote renewed covenant. So some of you are going to want to listen very carefully. It is quite frequent in some quarters of today's Messianic community to not hear the term new covenant used in reference to the Jeremiah 31 to 34, and Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27 promises, but instead hear the term renewed covenant. Many people, including myself, have once innocently used the term renewed covenant without thinking it through clearly enough. Using the terminology renewed covenant is a tempting solution for people wishing to emphasize continuity between the promised Brit Chadashah and the previous Sinai covenant, Jeremiah 31:31. Because for some people, the term new covenant equates to something completely removed and separate from the Tanakh scriptures. But using the term renewed covenant actually creates some rather tenuous issues when fully evaluated. From a semantic standpoint, those who think that renewed covenant is what we should use like to argue that the Hebrew adjective chadash, often frequently defined as just new, Brown Driver Briggs, should be considered renewed. Its related verb, chadash, can mean renew, repair, Brown Driver Briggs, and so Brit Chadashah should be renewed covenant to emphasize how it aligns with the character of the previous covenants. No one who reads the promises of Jeremiah 31 to 34, or Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27, can discount the continuity between the previous Sinai agreement and this anticipated agreement. There is far more in common between the two than what many of today's Christians realize. Yet, the uniqueness of this Brit Chadashah is that permanent atonement and forgiveness are offered, which has been provided by Yeshua's sacrifice. Within such a promise, God has no intention of renewing the ministry of death or condemnation, 2 Corinthians 3, 7, 9, which Yeshua's death has now rendered inoperative, Colossians 2, 14. Also to be considered regarding the usage of chadash is what is to be made of God giving his people lev chadash ve'ruach hadashah. Ezekiel 36:26. Is this to actually be taken as being a renewed heart and a renewed spirit? Think about this. Is the Lord simply going to take an old heart, not filled with love for him and neighbor, and then make a few small fixes, renewing it? Of course not. God is not going to renew a sinful and unregenerate heart, performing the spiritual equivalent of bypass surgery, but still leaving the same old heart and old way of thinking inside of a person. Because of the presence of sin within unredeemed human beings, we each have to be given an entirely new heart and spirit by the Lord. This new heart, transplanted within us, will enable us to walk by faith, not by sight, 2 Corinthians 5:7, and desire above all else to be in the will and presence of our Savior. Referring to the promised Brit Chadashah as the renewed covenant and not the new covenant, in wanting to express continuity with the Torah and Tanakh, is a misdiagnosis of the problem and is even a bit superficial. The reason it is superficial is that it largely misses the substance of what Jeremiah 31:31-34, and Ezekiel 36:25-27 promise. Both of these prophecies detail how the Lord will supernaturally write his commandments onto the hearts of his people. In explaining the relevance of the Torah for believers today, should we not direct the attention of Bible readers to these prophecies? What does it mean for God to write the law onto the heart? People need to read these prophecies verse by verse and not skip over them anymore. They need to carefully evaluate what the Brit Chadashah actually is, as stated in the text. There is a sad misunderstanding in that people today often equate new to meaning that something is completely different, when it is not. When somebody goes out and buys a new car is still a car. A new car still has a chassis, wheels, and a motor, even if it might have some additional features, a different paint job, and other improvements which your previous car did not have. Similarly, the new covenant is going to have quite a bit in common with the Sinai covenant which preceded it. Walter C. Kaiser recognizes, quote, "Some have argued that it was the Lord's original intent to replace the old with a new covenant, but if that were true in every respect, then why does the new covenant repeat almost 3/4 of what had been in the Abrahamic to Davidic covenants? Rather than superseding the covenants of promise that had preceded it, it affirmed them as well as supplemented them," unquote. From his book, The Promise Plan of God. Many commentaries on Jeremiah and Hebrews, where the terms Torah and Namas appear relating to God's law, Jeremiah 31:33, Hebrews 8:10, 10:16, are often silent about what the transcription of this instruction onto the heart really means. It is naive of any Bible reader to think that the Lord is only concerned about us expressing love for him and neighbor. And this is the furthest extent of what it means for the law to be written onto the heart. Even though these are surely the most important of commandments, more obedience to the Torah than just love is undoubtedly required. J. Andrew Dearman rightly describes how the Torah is, quote, "the verbal expression of God's will," unquote. Remarking on Jeremiah 31:31-34, another Christian commentator, Patrick J. Miller, observes, quote, "The Lord will make a new covenant and will effect in the minds and hearts of the people the will to obey. to live as God's people, to acknowledge the Lord as their master, the one who secures their lives and provides for them. Unquote. Rather than use the term renewed covenant, today's Messianic believers need to focus on how obedience to God is a definite part of the Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34, and Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27 promises. Such obedience does indeed begin with manifesting his great love to all, but it should also be present in concrete actions of service to others, i.e. James 1:27, and in our daily lives as we strive to really understand what Torah is. All right, so that concludes our examination of what is the new covenant for today. We're going to continue with this series on Monday, and you can already see what we're going to address on Monday with what has changed in this era of the new covenant. So this is not an easy issue for a lot of people in the self-labeled at times Torah movement. It's much easier for people in the Messianic Jewish sphere of influence who have been positively influenced by evangelicalism. But yes, we do live in an era of new covenant, and there are some natural post-resurrection changes resultant of that, and the scriptures say so. So we're going to deal with that on Monday. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. Now let's move on to our news roundup. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. We are reminded, number one, to be praying for peace in Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. And then number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. And yes, we've got some stories involving the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, and the American home front, among other things. Excuse me. All right, so all of the links I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. All right, our first story, this is from Open Source Intel, forwarding on a post from the Tucker Carlson Network. Tucker Carlson continues to amaze many of us. Last week, of course, he was at a summit in Qatar. Here, he talks about how Israel is not America's greatest ally, but instead he talks about, you know what country does benefit the United States? Qatar. So Open Source Intel passing this along. And there will be people who would disagree with this, especially within today's Messianic sphere of influence. There are a lot of things which the United States benefits from in its relationship with the state of Israel. There are things about the growing relationship between the United States and Qatar which are very disturbing. And indeed, it does disturb me about, President Trump, you accepted a free aircraft from Qatar. Donald Trump Jr., you were right next to Tucker Carlson at that event in Qatar. And so there are these questions about the influence of Qatar, and many have considered them to take a very lax position as it involves Islamic terrorism. So, look, the road signs are there regarding the MAGA right. It is divided on the issue of Israel, and today's Messianic community needs to be aware of this, as we do believe that in the past year, while we don't wish to be presumptuous, we have taken some giant leaps forward toward the return of Yeshua. All right, from the New York Post, considering the division in the MAGA right, Breaking, this is from yesterday. The man accused of assassinating conservative activist Charlie Kirk in the middle of a college event looked calm and chuckled with his lawyers as he appeared for the first time in person in a Utah court with his family in the gallery. So this is obviously something we have to continue to watch and monitor. Following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I said, there are going to be, three main phases we have to go through. Number one, that's the initial mourning phase. Number two, the investigation phase into what happened. So this story would clearly fall into that rubric. And then number three, sorting through the legacy of Charlie Kirk. And unfortunately, right now, much of that legacy is the conservative movement lost a very important person. There's this vacuum, and is this vacuum being filled by people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, even Nick Fuentes, God help us. That is something which, of course, is very, very concerning. Excuse me. Okay, our next story, and this is something very important to keep in mind because we've got Hanukkah, the Festival of Dedication, coming up very, very soon. In fact, tomorrow in my local congregation, they've got a lot of activities to be involved with. But this is from the Jerusalem Post on Instagram. Hanukkah reveals the great Jewish survival debate. Opinion: what keeps Jews strong as anti-Semitism surges in democracies? As Hanukkah begins, Gil Troy examines why the worst anti-Semitism since the Soviet Union's fall is spreading in liberal democracies, not dictatorship. With 70% of non-Orthodox American Jews intermarrying and anti-Zionism rising among some Jews, Troy asks whether traditional breaks against assimilation are failing and if Jewish survival now requires living in Orthodox or Zionist bubbles. Now, one of the things this kind of post, this kind of story highlights, and I don't know, every Messianic Jewish congregation and synagogue is different. But I know a number of years ago when our family, started remembering Hanukkah, the main thing which was being focused on is, look, without the Maccabean revolt, without the rededication of the temple, there would have been no temple in Jerusalem in the 1st century CE for Yeshua to have been dedicated in and to perform the necessary Torah prescribed rituals. And I definitely understand that approach, but a much deeper approach regarding the significance of the Maccabean crisis, the Jewish revolt, which we don't often discuss. If you are a Jewish person, a Messianic Jewish believer, if you are the product of an intermarried relationship, one spouse being Jewish, another spouse being non-Jewish, so you are a Messianic Jew, but you're half Jewish or a quarter Jewish. The issue of assimilation is very much something which presses upon you. According to this article, at least, 70% of non-Orthodox Jews intermarry. That is admittedly too high because, of course, what are the children going to think? Are they Jewish or are they not Jewish? The issue of assimilation for Jewish people is very, very real. And much of the significance of the 2nd century BCE Maccabean crisis is its influence on the 1st century CE. And a lot of the xenophobia demonstrated by the Messianic Jewish believers toward different Greeks and Romans coming to faith in Israel's Messiah. Were they going to influence the Messianic Jewish believers more than they were going to influence them? And these are very uncomfortable subjects to think about, to discuss. We don't often review them within today's Messianic sphere of influence to the extent which we should. Because I know that a lot of non-Jewish people who come into the Messianic Jewish movement and they wonder, and mind you, there's a complicated history of Jewish-Christian relations over the centuries. Along with that, with a Jewish person, it can take a very long time to develop trust, to develop a rapport, to develop a relationship. It's not like you can just instantly have a relationship sometimes, but it is because of the fallout of things like the Maccabean crisis. And there are a lot of different themes to be explored from 1st and 2nd Maccabees and from the Maccabean crisis. And it is up to your congregational leadership to know which theme to focus upon. But some of those themes of the Maccabean crisis are very relevant, especially in our growing time of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, and anti-Zionism. So it's a good thing to look at from the Jerusalem Post. Okay, here's one from the New York Post yesterday. Erica Kirk tearfully rebukes people who celebrated her husband's death. You're sick. And that's true. Absolutely true. We do not rejoice over the death or over the harm of any human being. And Charlie Kirk's assassination was something which was absolutely tragic. And we're going to be sorting through a great deal of this between now and the midterm election here in the United States. So in about another 11 months or so. And we're going to be sorting through it this second Trump presidential term. And yeah, it's something which is, of course, very disconcerting. All right, from Ynet Global, this is from December the 10th. I thought this was interesting. On the way to a positive shift, Israel moves to rebuild Latin America ties in 2026. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar says 2026 will be the year of Latin America as Israel works to rebuild ties across the region. Bolivia will restore relations after 16 years, and elections in Chile, Brazil, and Colombia could bring friendlier leaders. Okay, and there, of course, you see him shaking hands with the president of Argentina. So Israel does know, in terms of its diplomatic situation in the world, that it cannot solely rely on the United States of America as its main partner and ally. It needs to cultivate relations in Latin America. So we definitely pray and hope that progress can be made in those areas. Okay, as it concerns the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, here is a post from CUFI, that's Christians United for Israel, on Instagram. Thought I'd pass this along. Yes, that's John Hagee, whether you like him or not. In a world where Jewish lives and Jewish history are reduced to clickbait, we are reminded God defends his people and he will judge anti-Semitism wherever it arises. We stand with Israel, not for trends, but for truth. Indeed, I've said this before. I've said it multiple times that I have had to block a lot of things on a platform like Instagram, things which are blatantly anti-Semitic, promoting Jewish hatred, Israel hatred, the claim that the Jewish community wants to see Christians and Muslims divided because the Jews are the true enemy. There's a lot of that crap which circulates on social media. And yes, a lot of it's tied into, Revelation 2:7-9, synagogue of Satan, something completely taken out of context. It's tied to a lot of negative Jewish stereotypes. It's tied to quotations from the Talmud, which are cherry-picked and which really have, the Talmud says a lot of things about a lot of different subjects, the same way the early Christian writings say a lot of things about a lot of different subjects. And you've got people who are not Bible teachers, they're not religious studies scholars, and they develop massive followings. But more than anything else, they're not focused on what God's plan is for humanity on earth. That's the biggest thing. Okay, our next story, and this involves our situation here in the Western Hemisphere from Open Source Intel. This is from yesterday afternoon, 1:31 p.m. So while we were having our live stream yesterday, the U.S. is preparing to intercept more ships transporting Venezuelan oil following the seizure of a tanker this week, as it increases pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Reuters reported, citing 6 sources familiar with the matter. Okay, what is happening in Venezuela? I mean, there are a lot of people, of course, who are speculating that the Trump administration is using, well, Venezuela is a narco-terrorist state to position the U.S. Navy to overthrow the Maduro regime just so we can get Venezuelan oil. I know that's one theory. And then, what about Colombia next? Look, there's corruption all over the world, and this kind of corruption, narco-terrorism, is unfortunately a big feature in a great deal of Latin America. But there are sincere born-again believers in these countries. Pray for them. As I've said, I remember when I was living in Central Florida and definitely knew a lot of people who had left Venezuela because of the regime. Okay, here's one, and it involves both the Middle East as well as the Far East. Posted yesterday on Open Source Intel, Taiwan's Deputy Foreign Minister Francois Wu made a discreet visit to Israel last month, Reuters reports, despite the absence of formal diplomatic ties. While details remain secret, the trip is believed to have involved discussions on defense and security matters. Okay, so Israel having at least some kind of unofficial contact with the government of Taiwan. Yeah, we definitely live in an interconnected world. Let's just say that, and let's wait and see what comes of these kinds of relations. Okay, from President Trump himself, yesterday on Fox News, at 5:30 p.m., there's a 55-second clip. Peter Doocy, now that we've seized the tanker, is the campaign against Venezuela still about drugs, or is it now also about oil? And according to President Trump, well, it's about a lot of things. And he mentions Venezuela sending people from their prisons, gangs, drug dealers to the United States, people from mental institutions. Yeah, it's about a lot of things. Okay, we've got 4 more stories, and the next one deals with the situation Russia-Ukraine. This is from today, Visegrad 24, the 12th of December. So we know this is going back and forth. United States, Russia, United States, Ukraine, Europe, NATO. Here we see the Kremlin has responded to Zelensky's comments about holding a referendum on territorial issues. Now, that itself would be a huge development if, while the Ukrainian government unwilling to just cede occupied territory to Russia, would instead say, look, why don't we hold a referendum and the people can decide, the people can vote. But here, of course, you see Donbass is Russian, all of it. It's in the Constitution, said Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov. So, according to Ushakov, the entire territory of Donbass, which is this territory right here, will come under full Russian control, if not through negotiations, then by military means. So, yeah, this conflict, Russia-Ukraine, just going to go back and forth, it seems. Yet, it appears it to be floated out there, well, why can't we have a referendum and the people vote on whether they want to be part of Ukraine or Russia? That's okay. To the Middle East. Okay, this came during the middle of the night, late yesterday, from the Jerusalem Post. Israel agrees to fund Gaza reconstruction for time being at U.S. demand. Ynet. The estimated cost to repair the destruction from 2 years of fighting, bombing, and bulldozing is in the billions. So here's a story where basically you see that the Israeli government has agreed, at least in a preliminary sense, to help pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. And I know a lot of people are really upset and angry about this. But we know this is a situation which changes from day to day, week to week. What's going to be the final status of Gaza? Definitely a question mark. All right, 2 more stories from the New York Post today. It was on Instagram. This is December the 12th. Just in, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee released additional photos from the estate of late pedophile Jeffrey Epstein on December the 12th, featuring a who's who of celebrity, royalty, and political power, along with, excuse me, dark hints of the disgraced financier's links. So the headline is Woody Allen, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Bill Gates, Clinton, and Trump featured in new trove of Jeffrey Epstein photos. Okay, and of course, that is information which has to be interpreted. But we know whether you are on the right, the left, or the center, the Epstein files represent something which are going to get a lot of people upset. And people's trust in government, industry, entertainment, whatever, is going to plummet as a result of this. Who can I trust? Who doesn't have, a skeleton in their closet? Who doesn't have some dirt out there? Well, trust the Lord. Trust his plan. That's who we can rely upon. Okay, and then our final story, and some of you all are aware of the dust-up between Cambodia and Thailand. It's from Open Source Intel Defender 1151 this morning. U.S. President Donald J. Trump states that he had a very good conversation this morning with Prime Minister of Thailand, Anutin Charnvirakul, if I pronounced that properly, and the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Manet, that's slightly easier to pronounce, announcing that they have agreed to a ceasefire effective this evening, adding that they will return to adherence under the Kuala Lumpur peace accord signed in October. Now, it is true, Trump is wanting to see that there are all these peace agreements, whether it's Rwanda, the Congo, Pakistan, India, Cambodia, Thailand, Israel, Gaza, and they're working diligently on Russia, Ukraine, but there's always going to be start and stop. We live in an unstable world, and there are a lot of uncertainties, and we've mentioned a few of those uncertainties right now. And yes, this week we are, depending on whether you do it both at your local congregation and or at home, that's entirely up to you. We are getting ready to remember the Festival of Dedication, or Hanukkah. There are significant themes regarding Hanukkah: the Maccabean crisis, the resistance against the Seleucid Greeks, their desecration of the temple, and while many people, as I've seen in the past, focus on without the work of the Maccabees, you wouldn't have a Jewish people preserved in which the Messiah of Israel could be born into, and a temple for him to see the necessary rites and rituals performed. That's absolutely true. But also, Hanukkah teaches important lessons about resisting assimilation, resisting godlessness, as well as important themes regarding the future anti-Messiah, antichrist, abomination of desolation, and some of the horrors of the future 70th week of Daniel. So those are all things which you can focus on regarding Hanukkah. Read through 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Apocrypha. There's a lot there which will tell you about a very important period of history which profoundly affected the 1st century CE and expansion of the good news into Greek and Roman areas. All right, so that concludes our live stream for today. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee Moment shorts, and generally speaking, you can take a look at our different ministry adventures from over the years. Please do give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It will definitely help its exposure on social media. We will see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you Shabbat Shalom, and take care.